Hi.
Oh my gosh, how are you?
I'm so looking forward to having this conversation. I was having a rough day and I was like, wow, at least I have this in the evening.
Oh my God, let us just start right there. Okay, so first of all, anyone from Chronicon's page who is tuning in or watching this on our IGTV later, we're having an amazing conversation with Alok Menon, and I am so honored and so thrilled. I spoke to Alok one on one for the first time like last week, and I was like weepy throughout our conversation. And basically Alok was just being himself, and just having a straightforward conversation with me. And I was so moved by all of the things that you were saying. And I'm so excited to share you with Chronicon. So I just wanted to start by welcoming you, Alok.
Thank you. And I want to say thank you for establishing Chronicon and initiating these courageous dialogues. I feel like conversations around chronic pain and chronic illness are so invisibilized, and it's so powerful to have this space.
Thank you so much for saying that. And I know I love your hair, Alok. I know I
Oh,
am
thank you.
jealous of your hair. I was actually having a whole conversation with myself about my hair before I got on here. Like, what are we doing about our hair right now? It's a whole thing.
Right.
It really is. But so tell me, so what was going on with your day? Do you want to share a little bit about what was happening or what you're feeling right now?
I've been writing a lot of poems because it's National Poetry Month. And so
Mm,
every day I've been writing poems, and poetry has always been a healing modality for me, but it makes me have to become even more empathetic than I am on a day to day
mm,
because I have to feel all the pain that I feel and express it.
mhm,
And so I think that I'm just like in this extreme heightened sensitivity right now because I'm so emotionally present with myself and the world. And
mm,
what a time to be emotionally present with the world, where I'm just feeling every death and
mm.
feeling all of the profound pain, and just like from minute to minute feeling grief, anger, sadness, confusion, frustration. But then I just keep on returning to the wisdom of trauma informed work and just understanding like we're all having trauma responses,
Mhm.
but just trying to be patient with myself and other people right now because I think that we're holding so much trauma in ourselves.
That's so powerful. And I personally really appreciate you saying that because I was having a conversation with a friend earlier today, and I feel like I am really present to the grief and the trauma right now. And being an empathetic person as well, I am what you just said about how every second is different, every minute is different, is how I am feeling so deeply. And that at the same time, I feel like when I see that on the news, all these things are happening, it feels like other people are feeling that as well. But when I call my friends, not everybody's saying that that's what they're going through. I don't know if you've experienced that at all, but I haven't had as many people in my life that are saying that they're having an emotionally tough time,
Hmm.
but I really am. I feel like I'm really feeling all of it. So just for you to share that with us is honestly really helpful.
I think as I was thinking about what I wanted to talk about tonight, I really feel like living with chronic pain
Mm,
has allowed me so much, taken so much from me, but also allowed me so much. And one of the things that it's allowed me is an ability to name my pain. I
mm,
think many people in this world are afraid of naming pain and have been conditioned into thinking that if they are naming pain, that it's selfish or that it's too sensitive. And so most people in this world numb themselves to pain. But I feel like a lot of us living with chronic illness, chronic pain, have not ever that numbing mechanism doesn't work because when you're so overwhelmed by it, you have to actually sit with it. And I think what it's given me is a proficiency in the vocabulary of pain. Like
mm,
I'm able to be like, this hurts, or this is a traumatic situation. And I think it's not that naming pain gets rid of pain,
mhm,
but there is a release there in a culture that doesn't that like presumes that no one is living in pain, to be able to say I'm in pain and to have other people say I'm in pain too. I
mhm.
might not feel what you're feeling, but I acknowledge that it's real. That really does a lot.
Yeah, that's everything. right there, honestly. That is why I have that podcast, The Point of Pain, and I'm interviewing you for that next week, which I'm so excited about. And yeah, that's everything. I think that honestly, not having to name your pain feels like a privilege that people with chronic conditions, people who have experienced extreme othering and trauma, it's just not a privilege that we
Right.
have. And someone was asking, what do you mean when you say naming the pain? Do you want to say a little bit more just to speak to that?
Sure. So I think that we're conditioned into this world to think that pain is often a selfish thing. Like when you say, I'm hurt or this isn't working for me, um, people will be like, why are you making this about you?
Mm-hmm.
And so often we don't state when we're actually in emotional pain, physical pain, spiritual pain, because we want to make other people feel more comfortable. And when we actually say, I'm hurting, or
Mm-hmm.
I need space, or I have to rest, or this dynamic is really hurting me, then people think you're placing a boundary is synonymous as you attacking them.
Mm-hmm.
And that comes from an insecure place because if people were actually celebrated for stating their pain and their boundaries, when we did it to one another, we'd be like, oh, wow, totally. Life is brutal. I don't know what you're going through. I'm really grateful that you're naming that and that you're creating the boundaries that you need.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that I also think that was so beautifully said. And I also think that the other thing that comes up for me, which I've written about a lot, is that there's a lot of just rejection and then that bodes isolation. And that's the thing that, at Chronicon, we really want to create is to break the cycle of isolation. And I know that
Right.
that's so inherent in like all the work that you do. And it's because a lot of times, like what you're saying, I'll have the pain and I'll call my closest friend or I'll go to my parents or whoever that person is or multiple people in my life and I'll try to share that. And they don't want to be with their own
Mm-hmm.
pain. That the thought of being with mine is like, sorry, I can't. Like, and then, and that is like another level of pain and another level of rejection. And then what I found is that that just perpetuates that cycle of like, okay, then I'm not going to talk about my pain. That's why we have a whole society built on numbing our pain. It's such a huge intrinsic part of the dialogue and the conversation in this world.
Right. It really breaks my heart because people need permission to
Mm-hmm.
speak about the pain that they're going through.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like we've just experienced so much rejection in the world for naming our pain
Mm-hmm.
that when someone actually says, like, you can unload or like you can be honest about what you're going through, it can
Yeah.
feel like one of the most profoundly validating experiences
Yeah.
ever. And especially when you're living with an invisible disability or an invisible illness, and people presume that your life is like wonderful, everything's going great.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and you are actually able to see people who are like, yo, I don't actually know what you're going through, but
Yeah.
I believe you for your pain.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think that when you're not believed for your pain,
Oh
it actually
gosh.
can make the pain worse.
Oh my gosh, yes. And that's where so much of the mental health struggle that's compounded with, the physical things that we're going through. I mean, I was thinking about, what I wanted to talk to you about today too before we got on. And today I had an allergic reaction. I'm fine now, but I had an allergic reaction to something. And the way my allergic reaction manifested was in my skin. I started to feel like a lot of pain on my face.
Hmm.
And again, I'm okay now, but I had this sort of, swirling around in my head like, oh my God, my mom can't really see. There was nothing, it wasn't like I was breaking out in crazy hives where I could say, oh my gosh, look how horrible this is, and I started to feel just the weight of that. And that was in just a few moments, right? And there are people that are living with pain and trauma in their bodies. And I know you know what that's like. And it's constant and it's for decades and no one can see it. And that is a whole other thing. So I don't know if you feel comfortable sharing a little bit about your story of, how you've dealt with chronic pain in your life and what that's been like for you. I think people would really love to hear that from you.
Yeah. I feel like it's dealing. Like,
Mhm.
I think that we want pain stories that are before and after,
Yeah.
but the chronic comes in and complicates that entire narration. For those of us who are living with chronic pain,
Yeah.
um, you have to develop coping strategies to
Mhm.
relate to your pain as a continual presence.
Mhm.
And that has been one of the most difficult experiences of my life
Mhm.
because I every day pray, like, is today going to be the day? Like, is that I'm going to wake up and then I'm going to have a pain free day.
Mhm.
And it's not. And so there's a kind of sense of betrayal and sadness and alienation and isolation every day. So not only do you have to have an outlet for the pain, you have to have an outlet for the disappointment or the emotions that come up from the pain.
Mhm.
And what I found in my life is poetry is one of the only spaces that I have where I can address both simultaneously.
Mhm.
Because what I'm doing when I'm writing poetry is that I am sitting with my pain, I'm saying hi, I'm checking in, and then I'm trying to bring it energetically out of my body.
Mhm.
And I believe that there are a lot of healing modalities in the world that are about how do you shift energy outside of yourself, from the inside to the outside. And there's a kind of release there.
Mhm.
And sometimes that release doesn't feel immediately like I'm feeling better, but it allows me I guess, the stamina to keep going when it feels impossible.
Yeah. Yeah, that's powerful. I know for me, it's been music has been a huge part of, having me sort of focus on something that brings me light in a moment of incredible darkness. Is there a moment where you realized that though? You know what I mean? Like where you were like, oh, okay, this pain is either too much or it's consistent, and so I need to do something with it. Or was it just, did you just sort of fall into that and realizing that? What was that like?
I think that I didn't know why I was doing it because I think a
Hmm.
lot of what's really interesting about pain
Yeah.
is that oftentimes we lack the language, both to describe what it is
Hmm.
and the ways that we relate to it. Because
Hmm.
the thing about pain, and I think about this a lot, pain is so intense, it escapes language. Like, the language that we have to articulate pain is like on a scale of 1 to 10,
Hmm.
on a scale of, and there's always a reference point. And so, but when you live with chronic pain, your 1 becomes a 4, or you're sorry, your 4 becomes a 1 because
Hmm.
you lose reference of like what is normal, you know? And
Yeah.
so I feel like for a long time, I didn't even articulate that what I was experiencing was chronic.
Hmm.
And I didn't even articulate that when I was writing poems, what I was doing was a healing practice. It was
Hmm.
just more about how do I get by, you know?
Yep.
And I
Yep.
think that's why for me, I really think it's important to uplift the individual strategies that people are taking,
Hmm.
to survive as a form of artistry.
Hmm.
Because for many people who are disabled or living with chronic pain, every day involves a creative masterpiece. Like, how do I eat with all the dietary restrictions that I have to have? How do I get through my day with all the obligations I have while trying to pretend that I'm not in pain because I don't want to make other people uncomfortable with all, like, think that I'm too much, you know? There's just so much negotiation that you have to do. And I want to uplift that negotiation as a form of artistry. Um, and for me, art is not about something that lives in a gallery or something that you see on a stage. Art is the everyday ways in which we make our lives possible and perhaps even beautiful
Hmm.
despite everything.
Thank you for that. Yeah. Every time you speak, I feel like I just need a moment to sort of just let it soak into my cells. It's true because it feels like when you listen to poetry, just when you share things with us. So I really appreciate that perspective. Something that people ask us a lot in the chronic illness community is, how to deal with, we sort of touched on this a little bit, but how to deal with people in your life when they don't understand,
Mm.
what you're going through. So I know we kind of talked about the fact that a lot of people don't always understand, and that's a huge reality. But what do people do? That was a question that we had. So if you're, let's say, to bring up the dietary restrictions thing, if you're going home, like I know both of us are with our families right now, and we're keeping as safe as we possibly can during everything going on in the world right now. And so if they don't understand, oh, I can't eat these things, not because I'm being a diva, but because my body will break down if I
Right.
do, or, all the different points of accessibility and, just all the conversations that we've been having, things that people have to advocate for, constantly. Um, what do you, what would you say to someone who's dealing with that, with people in their life not understanding, so that they don't further isolate?
Right. I think I've been on a big journey over the
Mm-hmm.
past year,
Yeah.
um, where, I mean, I've been on a journey my entire life, but I think that I've been on a chronic pain journey this past year where I've really reevaluated my relationship to work, my
Mm-hmm.
relationship to my family, my relationship to my friends.
Mm-hmm.
And I've started to be like, my energy is finite. I think for a
Mm-hmm.
long time, I I was trying to be invincible and I was trying to do everything. And I felt like I owed everyone an explanation.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt very difficult. It felt very impossible for me to say, no, like I need to focus on myself.
Yeah.
And I think this is the past year I've started to really learn how to advocate that like I can't do this. Like I have to take care of myself and it's too much for me. And that was so hard because it felt like a
Mm-hmm.
defeat. It felt like I was surrendering and it felt like I wasn't fighting it because I think that you want to fight it because if you don't fight it, you feel like it wins.
Mm-hmm.
And you want to fight it because you want to set an example for other people. You want to be a sort of triumph narrative of like, look, I put in my time and I like gritted through it. And then I started to realize like we shouldn't have to endure even more pain to learn a lesson. I
Mm-hmm.
think that this culture teaches us like no pain, no gain. Like that there's this kind of romanticism of struggle as a way to learn. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, actually, there's a lot of ways to learn that don't involve experiencing more pain. Like, yes, I've learned a lot of things from my pain, but I shouldn't have had to experience pain in order to
Mm-hmm.
learn those things. And so what I've really started to do this past year is really learn my boundaries
Mm-hmm.
and actually tell people this is serious to me. And if you don't want to have these conversations with me, I can't be in this relationship with you.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, you can't do that with everyone in your life,
Mm-hmm.
but with me, I really made my circle smaller and smaller and smaller because I was like, I can't actually go out and party anymore. Like I
Mm-hmm.
can't be in like super loud, crowded places anymore. I actually need a kind of like quiet, intimate, kind of in person kind of intimacy now because I'm in pain.
Mm-hmm.
And to have those conversations with people, you really begin to realize who gets it and who only understands illness as temporary and episodic.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think a lot of the ways that we're taught about illness,
Yeah.
it's like you check out for 2 weeks and then you're back, you bounce back, you're back to being productive, you're taking off time because you're ill. But when you're experiencing chronic pain or chronic illness, it's way more like undulating. Like it's so it's
Yeah.
not even like a line doesn't even make sense as a metaphor. It like is like four dimensional. And
Yeah.
so all that we have is the ability to speak about it on a day-to-day level. And I guess I needed people in my life who could ask me that question, how are you feeling today? And for it not to be about just my emotions, but for it to also be about my physical pain. And I think that what is so tragic about, maybe I'm getting ahead of myself here, but what is so tragic about the Western world and the United States
Mm-hmm.
is the body and the mind have been separated.
Mm-hmm.
And when people say, how are you? They're often either only speaking about your physicality or only speaking
Mm-hmm.
about your emotionality.
Yeah.
And it's like, actually, I really want to hear the full check in. How's your spirit? How's your pain? How's your personhood? How's your how's your mental health? There's so many dimensions to who
Mm-hmm.
we are. And I guess I just really came boundaries are a way of also recognizing your worth. Like I think this past year I've really come into my worth and I've really been able to be like, okay, I have to protect me because me matters. And I don't think I felt that for a long time. I think everyone else had a piece of me and I felt like I had to I owed it to everyone. And now I'm kind of like, hey, I actually have limited capacity. And
Mm-hmm.
that limited capacity is also from an analysis that I need time with me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a lot of people in the comments are saying that they resonate with this so much, and I think a lot of people will for sure. One of the things that came up for me when you were saying all of that is that, people talk about boundaries and they talk about self-love, and all of those buzzwords. But what you're really sharing is that you have to put real work around implementing those things in your life. So if you're somebody watching and listening and you're like, oh, here's another person talking about boundaries, or, here's another person suggesting that I, just love myself. It's not like you do a downward dog or drink some turmeric and you're
Right.
fine.
Right.
That's not what we're saying. It's actually quite the contrary. It's actually, yeah, it sounds like to me, and add your thoughts in here as well, but I sort of saw this layered approach of first realizing what is it that you even want? What is it that you even need? What are the things that are even not really feeling that great, or the relationships with the people? And that was the first layer. And maybe that lasted many weeks, months, maybe even over a year. And then the next layer is like, okay, let me implement, what do I do about this thing that doesn't feel good? What do I do about enhancing that thing that feels great? And it's not just a one step approach, or that you're saying, okay, I'm going to love myself more and wake up in the morning. And it's there, which I think is a huge part of the toxic positivity that
Right.
happens, that people, and it's quite damaging actually when people
Extremely
feel,
damaging. Yeah.
yeah.
I'm really grateful that you're bringing that up because it's really hard when you're having a bad pain day
Mm-hmm.
and everyone is like, just keep your chin up, or like it's gonna get better, or like just do some yoga. Like everyone feels like they know what exactly, like everyone magically becomes an expert and like says like if you drink this one tea you're gonna be fixed. And it just kind of like people don't know how to dwell with enduring forms of suffering.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is something that I really have been feeling and writing about, because I'm like, actually, for many of us, it's not going to get better. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that so often acceptance of marginalized people is based off of like an empowerment arc. So it's like you were oppressed and now you're free, or it was hard for you when you were a kid, but now it's easier for you.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, actually, for especially, and I think my chronic pain informs my transness informs my chronic pain. And both of these scenarios, it's not really
Mm-hmm.
getting better, but what is getting better is my ability to advocate for myself, and my ability to know who I am, and my ability to protect myself. But the world isn't changing. And I also feel like what frustrates me about the toxic positivity is it puts the onus on individuals without
Mm-hmm.
thinking about how society can change. And
Mm-hmm.
one of the things that I've been speaking to you about is that there's a reason why there's not as much research about chronic pain and chronic illness. It's because many of us with chronic pain actually are people of color, are women and trans, um, and that if these were actually affecting like people with power, they would make it a major priority.
Mm-hmm.
But what has happened is that the medical establishment just kind of institutionalizes the fact that it's our fault. So
Mm-hmm.
they'll be like, it's just because you're stressed out, or it's just because you're not sleeping enough. And we're like, no. And they don't get it. And they just literally, I have so many friends and people in my life who have been doubted and disbelieved as they're advocating for themselves and their pain. And people will just completely diminish it because they don't recognize it. And that has everything to do with me, to race, to gender, to
Mm-hmm.
ability. Like one of my dear friends, Mama Cack, some of you might have followed her on Instagram, recently passed away. And we were messaging right before she passed away. And she was a treasure in my life because I could talk about my pain with her. And she would be able to be like really in it with me. and we were messaging while she was at the hospital, and she just basically was like, they just gave me some painkillers and told me to go home, even though I told them that I was in a lot of pain. And now she's passed, and it just makes me furious because I'm like, she was a dark-skinned, Black, disabled woman.
Mm-hmm.
And that informs who we think of as experiencing pain, you know? When you are gendered and when you're feminine, you're not allowed to be experiencing pain because, once again, it goes to that idea of you being selfish.
Oh, yeah. I'm just thinking of her right now. She was such a light. And yeah, I've been thinking a lot about even just with Corona, there's a disproportionate amount of, Black human beings that are dying because of it. And how many of those people possibly were telling, people in their lives or, nurse practitioners or doctors that they weren't feeling well and being dismissed. It's just infuriating on a level that is hard to be with, but hopefully also fuels conversations like this and gets us to talk about it more and gets us to break the vicious cycle that is happening. And
Right.
Speaking of, those beautiful conversations you had with Mama Cox, so there's a couple people in here who asked, how do you articulate your pain to people in your lives? So I know we talked a little bit about talking to people in your lives about what's going on, but I think it seems like these people are asking, like, what does that conversation look like? Like, if you're having a pain day, what are you saying when that's happening? What are the words?
I think it depends on whom,
Yeah.
like, and how much I trust them
Okay.
and how much they know about me.
Yeah.
Because also, I think part of it is also not everyone is entitled to know everything.
Mm-hmm.
And you are allowed to protect whatever information about your personhood you need to. So not everyone, you shouldn't, like, this idea that people's empathy is linked to your diagnosis needs to really be destroyed. You shouldn't have to have a diagnosis. You shouldn't have to be legitimated by an external authority that has ruled that your pain is real.
Yeah.
You should just be able to be like, I'm in pain, and that should be enough. For me, I guess, like, the most recent example was, I just was like, I can't work right now. I'm going to go lie down. And someone was like, are you okay? And I was like, no, I just really need to rest right now. And they were like, do you need me to do anything? And I was like, no, but I'll reach out upon you. So it's more like actions that I'm doing. It's also about removing myself from situations like, hey, everyone, I'm going to have to leave early. And what I found, and maybe it's sad that I have to do this, is, but I often don't say, I'm going to leave early because I'm in pain. Because the minute that you bring that up, then there's a whole host of questions, and then you have to answer everyone. It's like everyone's a doctor immediately. And so I'd rather just say, like, hey, I'm checking out. But that's why I think also part of allyship with people with pain is that we shift a culture of suspicion where we think that people are just doing things to avoid things. Like there's this whole narrative around flaking, right? Like, oh, they're just toxic flakers who blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, how many of those people actually have chronic pain and couldn't actually articulate to you because they don't trust you enough or they don't feel comfortable explaining to you exactly why? But we always default into, like, they're bad people, they're avoiding. And I'm like, no, actually, maybe they don't have the capacity. And we feel like, I hate the way that we treat each other, and and that we, I mean by everyone, because it's just so, we expect complete entitlement to people's personhood, to their ideas, to their health, history, and then if they don't, like, literally give you a full sheet of everything, then they're making it up, right? And that just really upsets me, this idea of making it up. And I think that's another conversation so much in trans communities and chronic pain communities that are having right now, is that there's this hierarchy of legitimacy that gets drawn, and then you're just seen as making it up if you don't fit into other people's preconceived notions of what gender is and what pain is.
Yeah, I think people are really resonating with that comment around flaking, because I think that that's rampant, and I think that it is a safety thing. There are some friends that I have in my life that I can definitely say, like, "Hey, I'm having a really bad flare today, and I can't leave my house, or I can't do this." But you know, if I'm going to a work event or if I'm going to meet someone new and I didn't necessarily, I don't have that relationship with them, and maybe it was something I was really looking forward to, but I just can't leave the house. You know, that's a big deal. And there isn't a lot of forgiveness around that. And then that adds to the shame that you might already be feeling. And, you know, that affects our mental health. So I think that's a really important point. And one of the things that I do, I have psoriasis and psoriatic arthritis for all of you joining from Aloks fan base. And one of the things that I've learned to do is to sort of talk to people or let people know before I show up somewhere that I'm having a hard time. Again, this is someone that I feel like I can do that with.
Right.
But I have sort of pushed myself, and I agree, it's frustrating that that has to be on me. I totally agree with that. But it has helped me a little bit. Like, I feel like, okay, you know what? I'm going to go to this party. I already know I feel crazy right now. I don't feel great. I want to go, but I'm not going to stay for like that second part that they talked about or whatever it is. And I'm just going to text my friend so that I don't have to make it a thing. Like you were saying, when you say to somebody and then they bring you all these questions and they start to giving you all these anecdotes and these remedies and stuff. So I do that sometimes, which is helpful. Yeah.
Yeah, I have mastered the art of having uncomfortable conversations because at the intersection of trans femininity and chronic pain means I find myself in really difficult situations a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've learned how to break down a lot of the kind of appropriate ways that we're supposed to communicate to people. So I'll give an example just with us, right?
Yeah.
We were supposed to meet up, and then my grandfather was extremely ill and ended up dying. And I was really depressed and really going through it. And I made a decision. I was like, okay, I can either lie to her and be like, hey, I'm gonna have to reschedule, or like I'm busy. But then I just was like, you know what? What I've learned in my life is the beauty of honesty and how to actually really communicate about what you're going through. And those are skills and geniuses that I've developed because I've had to navigate so many difficult situations. And so I was just really honest with you. And the way that you held that for me, I knew like you're the real deal. And that's why people with chronic pain really connect, is because we've had to have those uncomfortable conversations. We've had to explain, hey, I'm sorry, I can't do this because we've had to say like, hey, I actually really need help. My friend Mia Mingus is one of my biggest inspirations. You should all follow her if you don't. She's an incredible Asian American disability justice activist. And Mia has this beautiful story that she often tells about how one time she was like falling down and she had to ask people for help to like get up. And she started to realize how being a person with disabilities allowed her to do what able people should have already been doing, which is being interdependent. And that story allows her to speak about what she speaks about as access intimacy. That access intimacy is actually being able to develop intimacy with one another where we can know what our body mind needs are. Like, hey, I only like low music, or hey, don't ask me how I'm doing because that actually makes me traumatized. That we can actually start naming to one another, these are the things that I need in order to get by, and that we all prioritize understanding, just like we prioritize understanding someone's names or pronouns, we also understand what are their access needs.
That is powerful. Thank you for introducing me to that, because I've never heard of Mia and I need to check them out. That's amazing. Yeah. So something that is coming up from you and you're saying that is just like, I lost my train of thought, actually. I'm so mesmerized by what you just told me about Mia. I'm still thinking about it. Okay, so tell me, what are you doing to take care of yourself right now with everything going on? Because that is something we're already having these, you know, intense moments within ourselves in the chronic pain, chronic illness community, and with everything that we're going through. And then there's a pandemic on top of it. And I know that when we first started, it was kind of like we're sort of lucky that we're already used to having these conversations. And I'm grateful that I know how to have tough conversations in a moment when things are so tough. But at the same time, not everybody else is used to that. And as we're talking about, it's not a norm. And we're experiencing a lot of collective trauma and grief in a way that I know you've been aware of in the trans community, in the chronic illness, chronic pain community. Um, but how are you dealing with it? How is this moment for you?
Yeah, I'm gonna get emotional because
Yeah.
it's it's really hard right now for many reasons. I think firstly, what we're seeing is a kind of rampant and unchecked ableism,
Mm-hmm.
where people with disabilities and people with chronic illness and people with comorbidities are just seen as dispensable.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I remember that at the beginning of this pandemic, people would be like, oh, it's just affecting old people. And that was already horrific to just say, like, we could just sacrifice old people. But then when it became more apparent that it was people with comorbidities, there was a profile in everyone's head about what that looked like. Like, oh, it looks like um, people who look like this. And it's like, actually, what the data is showing is that there are so many people
Mm-hmm.
living with illness of all ages, of all physical appearances. And when you believe that there's like a demographic that looks like disabled, that's just so fucked up. And so it
Mm-hmm.
just really, I think it compounded a lot of loss and grief and pain in me to be like, this is the reality of a world that is so callous that it literally says that there are people, certain people that we can sacrifice. That's awful. And and it just made me think that eugenics is alive and well, that people are still making evaluations of people's livelihood on the basis
Mm-hmm.
of their mental and physical health. And it's like, we exist in the wealthiest country in the world. I refuse any narrative that says that there's not enough money or resources for there to be adequate healthcare for all people. I
Mm-hmm.
reject that. And that if we had actually listened and seriously considered what people with disabilities, what people with chronic illness, what people with chronic pain were saying for years, for decades, which is we need to shift the healthcare infrastructure
Mm-hmm.
because right now disability benefits are awful. Right now, there's actually no real support for me. If
Mm-hmm.
we had actually built a medical system that centered people with disability and chronic illness, we would all be able to bear the brunt of this pandemic. And I think that's really hard, is just to be like,
Mm-hmm.
right now we need the leadership of people with illness and people who are disabled, because these are people who have been blowing this whistle for a very long time, been talking about the prioritization of profit over people,
Mm-hmm.
and have been dismissed over and over and over again because they have to keep going back to the medical establishment because they're not just getting better. So I've been feeling that pain. And then I think I've also been feeling the pain of how we turn on each other.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think it's very easy for me now to be able to cope with external based prejudice. Like, I'm like, oh gosh, it's another like cis person doing this to me.
Mm-hmm.
But when in our own communities, we turn that shame that we experience externally, we turn that fear that we experience externally, and we deputize it against one another. And we're
Mm-hmm.
often more sophisticated in the ways that we harm each other because we know
Mm-hmm.
exactly what hurts. And
Wow.
so I always feel despair, where in times of crisis, I believe that's when we should be coming together and mutual aid and support. But instead, what happens is that same kind of ranking and hierarchization happens of like, well, you're not actually disabled, or you're not actually trans, or you're just, and it's just like, are you kidding me? Do we not understand how this is crabs in a barrel? Like, do we
Mm-hmm.
not understand how the system divides us against each other?
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's not okay. And so I think I've been feeling that pain and that sadness of being like, wow, we can't even come together in a pandemic. I wrote a poem yesterday where I was saying, I'm sorry that it took a pandemic for me to remember that we all breathe the same air.
Mm-hmm.
And what I meant in that line is, when we say we breathe the same air, what we're actually saying is that the particles that were intimately inside of you, you exhaled so that I could take the particles inside of me. That air is actually the most profound connectivity that's not even physical. And that doesn't just have to be about a virus, that can actually be about our interconnectivity, that we only exist because of everything that has ever lived or died. And if that's not the most profound argument for interdependence, I don't know what is. And so I've just been feeling some deep sadness around that. And the way that I cope, I guess, is I've been having long FaceTimes. I've been having long phone calls with friends. I've been really sinking into deep, deep intimacy. Like I've been just learning things about friends. What was it like for you in high school? What bands? Like things that we never had time to talk about. I've been doing the things that we never had time to do. I've been watching movies that I've been meaning to watch for years, reading books that I've put off for like 10 years. I've been writing again for the first time in a very long time. And I'm really trying to ask myself, why did I put off the things that were most pleasurable to me to now? Like, why couldn't I have integrated reading a novel every week? Like, why did it take me being a pandemic to be like, wow, fiction makes me exhilarated? Because fiction for me is one of the most moving things in the world to me, and it always has been. I've always gotten lost in books because I couldn't control the physical world. I I loved being lost in a book because I was teleported elsewhere, and I learned that there were many worlds that were possible, and that through literature you could just create your own rules, and that gave me so much permission to create my own rules. And I'm rekindling my love of literature. I'm rekindling my love of art. And so I guess, like, even though there's profound despair and pain and anguish and loss, there's also the possibility to return to the very things that grounded and core and made our core.
Wow, I just gave myself a hug when you said that. Like, I'm returning home. I've been reading the comments as I'm listening to you, and everyone is just so moved by how eloquent and beautiful you are. And some people are saying they could hear you speak all day and just feel really seen in the way that you are being so direct in your communication and in sharing with us. And I recently told a good friend of mine that the most loving thing you can do is be direct with me. And I really mean that. And I'm going to be 39 this weekend, and it's kind of taken me, I think, a long time to really own that that is something that I just need and want and crave in my life in every area. So just being in the same, conversation with you and having someone who's so direct and so thoughtful really provides so much balm to my heart right now, and it's just been a really amazing experience to talk to you. I feel like I could talk to you for 7 more hours. I probably would
well,
get
good
kicked
thing
off.
we have the podcast interview, and I just want to say to all of my followers who are tuned in today, please follow Chronicon. And Chronicon is an incredible convening where people with chronic pain can come together and build community and share resources. And our dear friend here established that, like a woman of color living with chronic illness, and follow her as well. This conversation, I really believe, can change the world, because I believe that people who are disabled and living with chronic pain and illness are developing ways of living, ways of communicating, ways of loving, and ways of caring that can fundamentally change the world. And so I really have appreciated the thought leadership that you've given us, but that Chronicon is also creating as a space. And there's going to be an in-person conference, hopefully, in January.
Yeah, we're figuring all of that out for sure. And yeah, there's so much that I want to create together and have you be a part of, and all the things. So if we can get together in person in January, that would be awesome. But either way, we're going to be doing digital stuff until then.
Okay.
So
thanks so much for having me.
Thank you, Alok.
Lots
Thank you
of love
so
to everyone
much.
for tuning in.
Yes,
Okay.
love
Have
to
a good
all of
night.
you. You too, sweetheart.
Bye.
Bye.